Long before European ships sailed around Africa, long before colonial powers arrived on the East African coast, a wealthy African kingdom controlled some of the richest trade routes in the world. Its merchants traded gold from the African interior for silk from China, spices from India, and luxury goods from Arabia. Its cities were built from coral stone. Its rulers became some of the wealthiest men on the African coast. This was the story of the Kilwa Sultanate, the empire that made East Africa a center of global trade. In 1331, the famous traveler Ibn Battuta visited Kilwa. He had already traveled through North Africa, Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. Yet among all the cities he had seen, he described Kilwa as one of the most beautiful and well-constructed towns in the world. One of his most famous descriptions was, "Kilwa is one of the most beautiful and well-constructed towns in the world." The Kilwa Sultanate was centered on Kilwa Kisiwani, an island off the coast of modern-day Tanzania. According to tradition, Persian merchants settled on the coast and mixed with local community. Over time, a unique culture emerged, the Swahili civilization. A civilization that blended African traditions, Islamic culture, Indian Ocean trade. Kilwa's rise was built on one thing: gold. Much of the gold came from the interior kingdoms linked to Kingdom of Zimbabwe. Kilwa merchants controlled the export of this gold to the wider world. Ships arrived from Arabia, Persia, India, China. The city became one of the richest ports in Africa. Unlike many settlements of the period, Kilwa was built with coral stone. Visitors described grand palaces, mosques, markets, and wealthy merchant houses. Among its greatest monuments was Great Mosque of Kilwa, one of the oldest and largest mosques in sub-Saharan Africa. The mosque was first constructed in the 10th century and expanded over several centuries as the wealth and influence of the Kilwa Sultanate grew. At the height of the Kilwa Sultanate, one building stood above all others, the magnificent Husuni Kubwa, meaning the Great Fort. Built in the early 14th century by Sultan al-Hassan ibn Sulayman, Husuni Kubwa was one of the largest stone buildings in sub-Saharan Africa at the time. The palace contained more than 100 rooms, large courtyards, private living quarters, reception halls, storage chambers, terraces overlooking the Indian Ocean. From this palace, the Sultan controlled a trading empire stretching along the East African coast. The Kilwa Sultanate was ruled by a series of powerful sultans who transformed a small island city into one of the richest trading powers in Africa. According to Swahili traditions, Ali ibn al-Hassan Shirazi arrived from Shiraz, Persia, and established the ruling dynasty around the 10th century. The most famous ruler of Kilwa, Al-Hassan ibn Sulaiman, ruled during Kilwa's golden age in the early 14th century. Under Al-Hassan ibn Sulaiman, Kilwa became the jewel of the Indian Ocean. Wealth flowed into its harbor, and coral stone palaces rose above the sea. Suleiman ibn Muhammad al-Malik al-Adil was the Sultan during peak trade, one of the rulers who oversaw Kilwa's dominance of Indian Ocean commerce. Archaeologists have found Chinese porcelain in Kilwa. These artifacts show that goods connected to the voyages of Zheng He and wider Chinese trade networks reached East Africa. Merchants from India brought cotton cloth, beads, spices, jewelry. They exchanged these goods for African gold and ivory. Merchants from Oman, Yemen came to Kilwa seeking gold, ivory, ambergris, timber. Many settled permanently, married local families, and helped spread Islam along the Swahili coast. For centuries, the Kilwa Sultanate had grown rich by controlling trade across the Indian Ocean. Arab, Persian, Indian, and African merchants traded freely. Gold flowed from the interior of Africa. Kilwa prospered. Then, in 1498, everything changed. The Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama arrived on the East African coast seeking a sea route to India. When the Portuguese discovered the wealth of Kilwa, they were astonished. They realized that whoever controlled Kilwa could influence much of the trade between Africa, Arabia, and Asia. Unlike earlier merchants who came to trade, the Portuguese wanted something different: monopoly. They wanted to control. Gold exports, Indian Ocean trade routes, strategic ports, customs taxes. The Portuguese crown wanted all ships to pay tribute to Portugal. In 1505, Portuguese forces under Francisco de Almeida arrived with heavily armed ships. The Portuguese possessed large ocean-going ships, heavy cannons, advanced naval artillery. This military technology was different from anything previously seen on much of the East African coast. The Portuguese accused Kilwa's rulers of resisting Portuguese demands and supporting their rivals. Facing overwhelming firepower, the Sultan had little choice. The city was occupied and a Portuguese-backed ruler was installed. Each impact shook the foundations of the city, turning the elegant mansions into jagged piles of debris. The architectural harmony of the Sultanate vanished under a relentless barrage. Stone pillars snapped like dry twigs. The ground groaned under the weight of falling masonry. What had been a sanctuary of trade and culture seconds ago was now a landscape of splintered walls and choking smoke. The empire that once commanded the Indian Ocean trade was now a pillar of flame against the night sky. The Portuguese built Fort Santiago. The fort served several purposes: protect Portuguese soldiers, control the harbor, collect taxes, monitor merchant traffic. This was a major shift. Kilwa had once controlled trade. Now outsiders controlled Kilwa. Interestingly, Portugal never fully achieved what it wanted. The Indian Ocean was too large. Merchants adapted. Many traders simply moved to other ports. Swahili merchants found alternative routes. Arab merchants continued trading. As a result, Portuguese control was often weaker than they hoped. The people of the Swahili Coast did not disappear. Cities such as Mombasa, Pate, Lamu continued to play important roles. By the 1600s, a new power emerged: the Sultanate of Oman. The Omanis challenged Portuguese dominance throughout the Indian Ocean. After decades of conflict, Portuguese influence weakened. Many East African coastal cities eventually came under Omani influence. Today, the coral stone ruins of Kilwa stand silent on the shores of the Indian Ocean. The merchants are gone, the sultans have faded into history, and the great ships no longer crowd its harbor. Yet Kilwa's story remains a powerful reminder that Africa was never isolated from the world. It was a land of traders, builders, sailors, and visionaries who connected continents, long before the age of European empires. Though the kingdom fell, its legacy lives on in the Swahili culture, the ancient mosques, and the winds that still carry echoes of a forgotten African superpower. If you enjoyed uncovering the lost history of Kilwa, subscribe and join us as we explore more forgotten kingdoms, empires, and civilizations that shaped our world. In our next episode, we'll journey to another remarkable African kingdom whose story is even more unbelievable. Until then, remember, history is far bigger than what we were taught.